The sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the dim corridor of Mercy General Hospital, where the air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken dread. At just 6 years old, Ruby Harlan lay motionless in a bed too large for her fragile frame, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. Tubes snaked from her arms to machines that beeped like distant warnings, monitoring a body pushed to its limits after a surgery gone catastrophically wrong. The doctors had been blunt. She needed a rare blood type, AB negative, the kind that coursed through fewer than 1 in 100 veins. Time was slipping away, measured in minutes now as her adoptive mother, Lila Harlan, clutched the edge of the bed, her knuckles white against the rails. Lila's eyes, red-rimmed from endless tears, scanned the room as if answers might materialize from the shadows. Ruby's biological father, a ghost from a one-night stand years ago, a biker she'd met at a roadside bar. His name lost to the haze of regret. No records, no leads, just a faded tattoo on her mind's eye, a promise of protection he'd whispered before vanishing into the night. Lila's phone trembled in her hand as she dialed the number she'd unearthed from old voicemails. A contact from Evan's network, Evan Brooks, the weathered veteran who'd become her unlikely anchor after adopting Ruby. At 39, Evan carried the weight of his own scars. A tour in the desert that left him with nightmares of sand and shrapnel, and a brother lost to the same roads that called him back. He'd traded his cut for a quiet life fixing engines in a small-town garage, but the rumble of Harleys never fully left his blood. When Lila's voice cracked over the line, "Evan, it's Ruby, she's fading. They need that blood. And I don't know anyone else." He felt the old pull, a vow from his club days surfacing like gravel under tires. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady as forged steel. "I'll make the call." One ring to a number he hadn't touched in years, and the network stirred. A silent chain of riders bound by codes older than the highways they patrolled. Outside, the pre-dawn sky bruised purple over the parking lot, mist curling from the asphalt like smoke from exhaust pipes. Evan stepped into the chill, his leather jacket creaking as he lit a cigarette, the flame flickering against the stubble on his jaw. The hospital's emergency doors whooshed open behind him, spilling a nurse who hurried past without a glance. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke twist upward, and punched in the code. A series of biker clubs across the state, connected not by charters, but by oaths sworn in dive bars and under starlit camps. "Iron Oath," the automated voice confirmed, a remnant of the alliance he'd helped forge after the war. Veterans, outcasts, men and women who'd chosen family over bloodlines. The message was simple. Rare type needed. Kid in trouble. Coordinates attached. Who rides? Miles away in a dusty motel on the edge of Black Ridge, Jax Harlan, unbeknownst to himself, Ruby's father, stirred from a fitful sleep. At 42, he was a shadow of the wild rider who'd crossed paths with Lila all those years ago, his arms inked with the Iron Oath emblem, a coiled serpent promising loyalty unto death. Life had ground him down. A stint in prison for a brawl that wasn't his fault, a divorce that stripped him bare, and the endless road that kept him from roots. His phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen glowing with the alert. AB negative. He was a match, though he didn't know why it mattered. Wiping sweat from his brow, Jack swung his legs over the bed, boots hitting the floor with a thud. The room smelled of stale coffee and motor oil, remnants of the bike he'd tuned late into the night. Without a word to the empty space, he grabbed his keys, the engine of his old Indian roaring to life outside. Headlights pierced the fog as he merged onto the interstate, a lone wolf answering a howl he couldn't ignore. Back at the hospital, Lila paced the waiting room, the linoleum squeaking under her sneakers. Posters of smiling families mocked her from the walls, their perfect poses a cruel contrast to the chaos inside. Evan arrived 20 minutes later, his truck skidding to a halt in the lot, dust kicking up in the beams of his headlights. He found her slumped in a plastic chair, Ruby's stuffed bear clutched to her chest. "They're mobilizing," he said, sliding into the seat beside her. His hand rested on her shoulder, calloused fingers gentle against the tremor in her frame. "Riders from 3 counties out. If there's a match in the wind, They'll find it. Lila looked up, her eyes searching his weathered face for the lie that wasn't there. Evan had his own ghosts, a promise to his fallen brother to protect the innocent, etched into his soul like the scars on his knuckles. This call wasn't just for Ruby, it was redemption's engine revving, pulling him back into the fray. As the first rays of dawn clawed over the horizon, painting the hospital windows in gold, the distant thunder grew. A convoy assembled on the outskirts of town, Harleys and choppers lining up like sentinels, their chrome glinting under the rising sun. Jax pushed his bike harder, the wind whipping through his beard, the vibrations syncing with his heartbeat. He didn't know the girl's name, didn't know the thread connecting him to this desperate ride. But the oath pulled him forward, a magnetic force against the isolation he'd built. In the lead truck, Evan coordinated via radio, voices crackling with urgency. Echo 1, you're clear on Route 17. Copy, heading to the depot for type check. The network hummed, a web of loyalty spanning dusty back roads and neon-lit strips, all converging on Mercy General. Inside, Ruby stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering like moth wings against the light. Lila whispered stories of the father she'd never known, tales of a man who rode with the wind, honorable in a world that chewed up dreams. The machines beeped on, a metronome to the approaching roar. Evan stood at the window, watching the horizon where the convoy would break into view. This wasn't about blood in veins, it was about the kind that bound souls, the promise that turned strangers into saviors. As the first bikes crested the hill, engines growling like an awakening beast, the hospital seemed to hold its breath. One call had ignited it all, a spark in the dark, racing toward a little girl who needed more than medicine. She needed family, the chosen kind, forged in the fire of honor and the open road. The sun crested fully now, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 17. Where the convoy sliced through the morning haze like a blade through silk, Evan Brooks gripped the steering wheel of his battered Ford, the radio crackling with updates from the riders fanned out behind him, 20 strong so far, their engines a low symphony of thunder that vibrated through the truck's frame. Dust devils swirled in the rearview mirror, kicked up by the Harleys trailing in formation, chrome accents flashing like signals in Morse code. He'd left Lila at the hospital with a nod that carried the weight of unspoken vows, her hand lingering on his arm as if anchoring him to the promise. "Bring her back," she'd whispered, and Evan had felt the echo of his brother's last words in the desert. Protect the small ones no matter the cost. Ahead, the road dipped into a valley dotted with sagebrush and rusted silos, the air thick with the scent of dry earth and wild sage. Jax Harlan leaned into the curve on his Indian, the wind tearing at his vest, carrying whispers of regret from years past. He hadn't questioned the alert. The iron oath didn't allow for that. It was a code etched into his skin, forged in the fires of barroom brawls and midnight rides, a pact among men who'd seen too much to walk away from a brother's call. But as the miles blurred, doubt crept in like fog off the river. Why this? Why now? His blood type was rare, sure, but the urgency in the message, kid in trouble, no time, gnawed at him. He pictured a faceless child, tubes and monitors, the kind of fight that mirrored his own battles with the bottle and the bottle's aftermath. The engine's roar drowned his thoughts, but not the pull, that invisible thread yanking him toward Mercy General. Back in the convoy's lead, Evan keyed the mic, his voice cutting through the static. "All units, tighten up. Depot's 10 miles out. Blood bank's got the mobile unit waiting. First match rides straight through." Affirmatives buzzed back, voices roughened by smoke and road dust. "Copy, Hawk." "On your 6. Hawk, that old road name clung to him like oil on a chain, a remnant from the days when he'd led patrols not on bikes, but in armored Humvees. He'd walked away after his brother's convoy hit an IED, the blast's echo still ringing in his ears during quiet nights. This ride, it was Absolution's throttle twisted wide open. The truck's tires hummed over a cattle guard, scattering pebbles like startled birds, and Evan glanced at the passenger seat where Ruby's bear sat, its button eyes staring accusingly. At the hospital, Lila Harlan pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the observation window, watching the sterile ballet below. Ruby's room was a cocoon of white, the girl's pale skin almost translucent under the lights, her tiny fists clenched as if fighting invisible foes. The doctor, a harried man with wire-rimmed glasses, had updated her an hour ago. "We're stabilizing, but without the transfusion, it's touch and go." Lila's mind replayed the night she'd met Jax, neon lights flickering over pool tables, his laugh cutting through the din, a fleeting promise of safety in his eyes. She'd never told him about the pregnancy, shame and fear burying the truth like gravel over a grave. Now, as the clock ticked past 8, regret bloomed sharp in her chest. Evan had promised riders were coming, but promises in this world often rusted out. The depot loomed on the horizon, a squat brick building flanked by chain link and faded billboards advertising long-gone diners. The convoy pulled in with a growl that turned heads in the parking lot, locals pausing mid-sip from thermoses to stare. Nurses in scrubs emerged from the blood bank van, clipboards in hand, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. Evan killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, the sun warming his shoulders through the leather. "We're here for the type check," he said to the lead tech, a woman with a no-nonsense bun and tattoo peeking from her sleeve, perhaps one of theirs or close enough. She nodded, gesturing to the line of bikes idling like patient beasts. Riders dismounted one by one, rolling up sleeves to reveal arms mapped with veins and ink, serpents, eagles, oaths in faded script. Jax arrived last, his Indian sputtering to a halt at the edge of the group, exhaust curling like a question mark. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the buzz of cicadas and the murmur of the riders. Evan spotted him immediately, the build, the emblem on his cut matching the one from Lila's vague description. No words yet. The process was ritual, efficient. Jax extended his arm to the tech, the needle's prick a familiar sting, like old wounds reopening. As the vial filled with deep red, he met Evan's gaze across the makeshift station. "What's the kid's story?" Jax asked, voice gravelly from disuse. Evan hesitated, the air between them thick with the scent of iodine and hot metal. "Doesn't matter, oath does." But inside gears turned, Lila's tales, the timing, the blood that might bind more than veins. The tech pulled the needle free, labeling the sample with swift precision. "Positive match," she announced, her voice slicing the tension. "AB negative, clean." A murmur rippled through the riders, nods of approval like silent toasts. Jax felt a jolt, not from the draw but from the weight of it all, as if the road had led him here for reasons buried deeper than he knew. The convoy reformed in minutes. Jax slotted into the vanguard beside Evan's truck, their bikes sinking in a rhythm born of shared scars. The ride back was faster, urgency fueling the pace, wind-whipping flags on antennae like banners of defiance. Evan radioed ahead to the hospital. "Match secured. ETA 20. Lila's reply came faint over the line, choked with hope. As they crested the final rise, Mercy General's silhouette rose against the midday sky, a beacon in the sprawl. Jax throttled down, the vibration steadying his pulse, unaware that the doors ahead held not just a child, but the echo of a life he'd left behind. Inside, the roar announced them before the dust settled in the lot. Lila rushed to the window, heart pounding in sync with the engines fading to idles. Evan led Jax through the corridors, the biker's boots echoing like Judgment Day. At the transfusion room, nurses prepped Ruby, her small form stirring as if sensing the tide turning. Jax paused at the threshold, the sight hitting him like a crosswind. A girl with eyes like his mother's, fragile but fierce. The doctor motioned him forward, and as the line connected, pumping life from stranger to kin, Evan watched from the hall. Blood flowed, but so did something purer, the quiet honor of men who rode for the forgotten, turning isolation into legacy. The oath held, as it always did, weaving threads across the miles. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The fluorescent lights in the transfusion room hummed like a distant swarm, casting harsh shadows across Ruby's pale face as the IV line dripped steadily, carrying Jax Harlan's blood into her veins. He sat rigid in the vinyl chair, the scent of rubber gloves and saline sharp in his nostrils, his tattooed forearm still bandaged from the depot drawer. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency, their footsteps soft on the tile, checking monitors that beeped in rhythmic assurance. Jax's eyes, shadowed by years of hard miles, fixed on the girl. Her chestnut hair fanned across the pillow, a faint flush creeping into her cheeks as the transfusion took hold. She was small, too small for the machines encircling her like silent guardians, and something in her features tugged at him, a whisper from a forgotten dream. Evan Brooks lingered in the doorway, arms crossed over his leather vest, the corridor's cooler air brushing against his neck. He'd seen men stare down sandstorms and ambushes without flinching, but this, Jax's gaze locking onto Ruby, carried a different weight, the kind that cracked open old vaults. Evan had pieced it together in the ride back, the timeline from Lila's stories, the emblem matching Jax's cut, the rare blood that now flowed like an unspoken confession. He didn't interrupt. The oath demanded discretion, letting truths surface on their own terms. Outside, the convoy idled in the lot, engines ticking as they cooled, riders sharing smokes and low murmurs under the midday sun. Chrome gleamed on handlebars, reflecting the hospital's brick facade like mirrors to another world. Lila Harlan burst from the waiting area down the hall, her sneakers squeaking to a halt as she caught sight of them. Her face, etched with exhaustion, lit with a fragile hope, eyes darting from Evan to the stranger at her daughter's bedside. "It worked?" she breathed, voice barely above the monitor's pulse. Evan nodded, stepping aside to let her pass, his hand brushing her elbow in silent support. Jax looked up then, his expression unreadable, the lines around his mouth deepening as Lila approached. She froze at the threshold, the air thickening between them like exhaust in a closed garage. Recognition flickered in her eyes, his broad shoulders, the serpent ink peeking from his sleeve, the gravel timbre of his voice when he finally spoke. "You the mum?" Simple words, but they hung heavy, laced with questions neither was ready to voice. "Yeah," Lila managed, sinking into a chair opposite him, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. Ruby stirred slightly, a soft sigh escaping her lips, the color in her skin deepening as if the life force anchored her. The doctor entered, clipboard in hand, his coat whispering against the doorframe. "Vitals are stabilizing. The match was perfect, levels are climbing already." He glanced at Jax with professional detachment. "We'll need you to stay for observation just to be sure." Jax grunted, shifting in his seat, the chair creaking under his weight. Observation? He'd ridden through worse without a backward glance, but this room held him captive. The girl's breathing sinking with his own pulse. Evan pulled Jax aside moments later, leading him to a quieter alcove where vending machines hummed and the scent of stale coffee lingered. The hospital's bustle faded to a muffled roar, pages over speakers, carts rattling like distant thunder. "You feel it, don't you?" Evan said, voice low, his eyes steady under the brim of his faded cap. Jax leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, the leather of his cut sighing. "Feel what? Some kid gets a lifeline, oaths fulfilled." But his tone wavered, doubt etching his brow. Evan studied him, the scars on his own knuckles whitening as he clenched a fist. He'd carried promises like this one since the war, vows to brothers who'd never ride again, oaths that turned lone wolves into packs. Lila mentioned a biker once, emblem like yours. Night she met him, promised protection, then he vanished. Jax's jaw tightened, memories surfacing like gravel kicked from tires. A roadside bar off Route 9, neon buzzing over laughter and clinking glasses. A woman with fire in her eyes dancing to jukebox tunes. Lila. The name hit him like a pothole, jarring loose fragments, her touch in the dark. Whispers of "stay safe" before dawn broke, and the road called him away. Prison walls and bad choices had buried it deep, but now it clawed free. That was years back, he muttered, rubbing his beard, the stubble rasping under his palm. Evan nodded, the alcove's shadows playing across his face. "Blood don't lie. Neither does fate. You rode for a stranger's call. Turns out it was yours." Back in the room, Lila sat vigil, her hand gently stroking Ruby's hair, the girl's eyelids fluttering open for the first time in hours. "Mama," Ruby whispered, voice thin as mist, her small fingers reaching out. Lila's tears fell freely now, relief washing over her like rain on parched earth. "I'm here, baby. You're gonna be okay." But as Jax re-entered, drawn by an invisible tether, Ruby's gaze shifted to him, wide and curious. "Who dat?" she asked, pointing with a bandaged hand. The question hung, innocent and piercing, the monitor's beeps underscoring the moment. Jax knelt beside the bed, his bulk careful, voice softening to a rumble. "Just a friend of the road, kid. Here to make sure you ride easy." Evan watched from the hall, the convoy's riders filtering in quietly, some with flowers scavenged from a roadside stand, others with toys from a gas station cooler. They filled the waiting area like sentinels, their presence a shield against the sterile cold. Word had spread through the network. The match wasn't just blood, it was legacy, a promise circling back after years in the wind. But tension simmered beneath the calm. A hospital administrator approached Evan, clipboard clutched like a shield, his tie askew. "Sir, we can't have this many. Visitors. Liability issues." Evan met his gaze, unyielding as rusted iron. Their family, and family's what kept her breathing. The man hesitated, sensing the steel in Evan's stance, the unspoken code that bent rules without breaking them. Jax stayed through the afternoon, the sun slanting through blinds in golden shafts, warming the room's chill. Stories emerged in fragments, Lila recounting Ruby's first steps, Jax sharing tales of endless highways and stars that guided lost souls. No accusations, no demands, just the quiet weaving of threads. Ruby dozed peacefully now, her chest rising steady, the crisis ebbing like a receding tide. Yet Jax felt the pull of unanswered questions, the road whispering temptations of escape. Evan clapped a hand on his shoulder as dusk painted the windows violet. "Oath binds us. Ride with it, or let it ride you." Jax nodded, the weight settling like a full tank, propelling him toward truths he'd evaded too long. Outside, the convoy stirred to life, engines coughing awake in the cooling air, headlights piercing the twilight. Riders formed ranks, a brotherhood forged in motion, ready to escort the revelation home. Jax mounted his Indian last, the familiar vibration grounding him, but his eyes lingered on the hospital doors. One call had bridged the miles, now it bridged the years, turning ghosts into guardians. As the group rolled out, dust trailing like a comet's tail, Mercy General faded in the mirrors. A chapter closed, but the story's engine still revved, carrying promises into the night. The twilight deepened into a velvet shroud over the interstate, the convoy's taillights stretching like a string of fireflies against the encroaching dark. Jax Harlan throttled his Indian steady, the engine's pulse syncing with the thrum in his chest as the group carved through the cooling night air. Wind sliced past his face, carrying the faint tang of pine from the roadside forests, mingling with the metallic bite of exhaust. Evan Brooks led in his Ford, the truck's silhouette a steadfast anchor amid the bikes flanking it, 20 riders now, their leathers creaking in unison, a mobile fortress bound by the iron oath. Jax's mind raced faster than the odometer, Ruby's eyes so like his own in their quiet defiance, the way Lila's hand had trembled when she'd finally said his name aloud in the hospital corridor. No anger in her voice, just a weary acceptance that cut deeper than any blade. He'd left that bar years ago without looking back, chasing horizons that promised freedom, but delivered only echoes. Now the road looped back, demanding payment in truths he'd long buried. Evan glanced in the rear view, spotting Jax's position in the formation, the man's posture rigid against the wind. Radio static crackled softly in the cab, voices checking in like sentinels. "All clear on the flank." "Tail secure." Evan had seen this fracture before, in war zones where brothers uncovered shared graves or on rain-slicked highways after a brother's wreck. Jax rode with ghosts now, and Evan knew the pull of unfinished vows all too well. His own brother's dog tags hung heavy under his shirt, a talisman against the what-ifs that haunted quiet garages. This ride wasn't over. The hospital had stabilized Ruby. But the real transfusion was happening out here, under the stars wheeling overhead. Lila had stayed behind with the girl, her parting nod to Evan laden with unspoken thanks. But Jax, he'd need more than blood to mend the miles between them. The convoy veered off the main artery onto a narrower blacktop, the asphalt whispering under tires as it wound through hills dotted with flickering ranch lights. Jax eased back on the throttle, letting a gap open to the lead bike, his thoughts drifting to the hospital room's sterile glow. Ruby's small hand reaching toward him, curiosity unmarred by the shadows of abandonment. Friend of the road, he'd called himself, but the words tasted like gravel. Incomplete. Prison had stripped him of softness, turning trust into a liability, yet the oath had dragged him here, overriding the instincts that screamed to vanish at dawn. A deer bolted from the brush ahead, eyes catching the headlights like embers, forcing the lead rider to swerve. Jax's heart lurched, muscle memory kicking in as he mirrored the dodge, the bike leaning low enough to feel the road's grit through his boots. Close call, but it sharpened everything, the fragility of what he'd almost lost without knowing. Evan keyed the mic as they crested a rise, the valley below pooling in moonlight. Brake for fuel in 5. Keep eyes open. State boys might sniff the formation. Affirmatives hummed back. The group a well-oiled machine despite the civilian plates masking their cuts. They'd skirted the edges of authority before, veterans who knew the thin line between help and hassle. In the truck's glove box, Evan kept a faded photo, him and his brother, arms slung over each other beside a line of Harleys, grins wide before the desert claimed one. Ruby's fight mirrored that loss, the innocents caught in crossfires not of their making. He'd called this network for Lila, but it was Jax's arrival that twisted the knife of fate. As the neon sign of a roadside diner flickered into view, engines downshifted, the convoy pulling into the lot like a herd settling for the night. Gravel crunched under boots as riders dismounted, the air thick with the aroma of frying grease and cooling metal. Jax killed his engine last, the sudden quiet amplifying the diner's jukebox spilling country laments through the screen door. He leaned against his bike, lighting a cigarette with a Zippo that clicked like a chambered round, the flame illuminating the serpent tattoo coiling up his forearm. Evan approached, hands in pockets, his boots scuffing the dirt. "She'll pull through. Doc said the levels are holding." Jax exhaled smoke in a slow plume, watching it dissipate into the night. "That ain't the question burning me." His voice was rough, edged with the miles he'd put between himself and regret. Evan nodded toward the diner, where a few riders clustered around a table, nursing coffees black as midnight. "Inside. Talk it out before the road pulls you under again." Jax hesitated, the cigarette's ember glowing like a warning, but the weight in his gut urged him forward. They entered together, the bell jingling overhead, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the chill outside. Booths worn smooth by transients, the waitress pouring refills with practiced indifference. Seated in a corner booth, vinyl cracking under their weight, Jax stared into his mug, steam curling like unanswered prayers. "Lila, she told you." Evan leaned back, the booth's springs groaning. "Pieces, enough to know the oath brought you home." Jax's fingers drummed the table, calluses tapping a restless rhythm. "Home? I ain't got one. Rode out that night thinking the wind would wash it clean. Woke up in a cell years later, wondering what the hell I'd thrown away." The words spilled like oil from a leak, dark and viscous. Evan listened, his face etched with the empathy of shared roads. "Ruby's got your fight. Saw it in her eyes when she looked at you. Blood's one thing, choice is another." Outside, a patrol car cruised past the lot slow, its spotlight sweeping the bikes like a suspicious eye. Riders straightened subtly, conversations dipping low, the code kicking in without a word. The waitress slid plates across, burgers sizzling, fries crisp and golden, but Jax picked at his, appetite lost to the churn inside. Memories resurfaced, Lila's laughter in that bar, her hand tracing his ink under dim lights, a promise murmured in the heat of the moment. He'd ghosted because the road was safer than staying, but now it circled back, demanding he face the man in the mirror. "What if I can't fix it?" he muttered, voice barely rising above the jukebox's twang. Evan met his gaze, steady as a horizon. "Oath ain't about fixing, it's about showing up. Ride back with us tomorrow. Meet her proper. Let the girl know she's got more than shadows watching." Jax crushed his cigarette in the ashtray, the ember dying with a hiss. The patrol car looped back, idling at the lot's edge, an officer stepping out with notepad in hand. Tension rippled through the diner, but Evan rose calm, heading out to meet it. Words of a charity run smoothing the edges, the badge retreating with a nod. As the convoy reformed under the stars, engines roaring back to life, Jack slotted in beside Evan once more. The night air bit sharper now, laced with the promise of rain on the wind. He twisted the throttle, the vibration chasing doubts into the blur of taillights ahead. Mercy General waited, not as an endpoint but a crossroads, where oaths forged in fire met the quiet strength of staying. The miles unspooled, carrying him toward redemption's slow burn, the family he'd never claimed now pulling him into its fold. One call had started it, this ride would seal it, turning lone echoes into a chorus that echoed across the dark. If this chapter moved you, please hit that like button. It helps spread these stories of quiet honor to more ears. Rain pattered against the windscreen of Evans Ford as the convoy pushed through the night, the wipers sweeping rhythmic arcs over the blurred taillights ahead. Jack's Harlan rode steady in the formation, water beading on his leathers like tears he wouldn't shed, the Indian's engine growling defiance against the downpour. The interstate had given way to a winding state route, flanked by sodden fields that stretched into the gloom, the scent of wet asphalt and pine seeping through his helmet vents. Hours on the road had worn the edges of his resolve, each mile peeling back layers of the man he'd built to outrun his past. Ruby's face haunted him, those wide eyes, the faint curve of her smile when she'd gripped his finger during the transfusion's aftermath. Lila's voice, soft but unyielding, recounting the years alone. Birthdays marked by empty chairs, nights when the girl's fevers broke with stories of a father who'd ride in like a hero from the tales. He'd listened from the hallway, the weight of it pressing like a full saddlebag, too heavy to shrug off. Evan's voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the storm's hiss. Pulling off at the next exit, motel up ahead. Roads are slick, no sense tempting fate. The group acknowledged with clipped responses, bikes signaling turns in a synchronized dance, their headlights carving tunnels through the sheets of rain. Jack's followed, the exit ramp banking sharp, gravel hissing under tires as they entered the motel's lot, a neon-lit oasis called Road's End, its sign flickering like a faltering heartbeat. Puddles mirrored the vacancy glow, and riders dismounted with grunts, shaking water from jackets like dogs from a swim. The air hung heavy with ozone and cooling engines, the convoy's thunder fading to the patter on rooftops. Evan killed his truck's lights last, stepping out to survey the group, his silhouette broad against the motel's faded facade. Inside the office, the clerk, a wiry man with grease-stained fingers, eyed the influx warily, keys jingling as he handed out rooms. Jax claimed a single at the end, the door creaking open to reveal a space smelling of mothballs and faint mildew, a single bulb casting yellow pools over the bedspread. He stripped off his wet cut, hanging it on a chair to drip, the serpent emblem glistening like a living thing. Stripped to his tee, he paced the thin carpet, the storm raging outside mirroring the one in his chest. Freedom had been his creed, ride light, leave no tracks, but Ruby's existence upended it, an anchor chain he'd never known was dragging behind. He sank onto the bed, the springs protesting, and pulled a worn photo from his wallet, a snapshot from prison release day. Him alone on his bike, horizon endless. Now that horizon looped back to a hospital bed, and a woman who'd raised his shadow into light. A knock rattled the door, and Evan entered without waiting, rain dripping from his cap, carrying 2 steaming mugs from the motel's ancient percolator. "Figured you'd be chewing gravel," he said, handing one over, the coffee's bitterness grounding the moment. Jax took it, the warmth seeping through ceramic to his palms. They sat on the room's lone bench by the window, watching lightning fork across the sky, illuminating the lot where riders huddled under awnings, sharing flasks and low laughs. "Lila wants you there tomorrow," Evan continued, voice steady as the rain's cadence. "Ruby's asking questions, innocent ones, but they cut deep." Jack sipped, the liquid scalding his tongue, a fitting penance. "What do I say?" "Sorry I vanished, kid." Road was calling louder than blood? His laugh was hollow, echoing off the panelled walls. Evan set his mug down, the clink sharp in the quiet. "Truth trimmed clean. Oaths about owning the miles you rode away, then riding back. Memories flooded Jack's then. The bar's haze, Lila's perfume cutting through smoke, the dawn ride that severed the thread. Prison had been his forge, hammering recklessness into regret, but he'd emerged armored, pushing connections away like bad turns. Yet the network had pierced it, the iron oath, a vow sworn with brothers who'd buried too many under stars like these. Evan leaned forward, elbows on knees, his eyes reflecting the storm's flash. My brother made me promise. Look out for the ones left behind. Lost him to a blast that took half a convoy. This? It's that echo. Ruby's yours, Jax. Claim it, or the road'll keep taking. The words landed like thunder, vibrating through Jax's frame. He rose, crossing to the window, fog blooming on the glass from his breath. Outside, a rider, an old-timer named Grit with a limp from some forgotten skirmish, nodded through the rain, a silent affirmation from the pack. Jax had run solo too long, mistaking isolation for strength, but the convoy's hum tonight proved otherwise. Family chosen in the grind of gears and shared silences. All right, he murmured, turning back, resolve hardening like cooling metal. Tomorrow, face it head-on. Evan clapped his shoulder, the gesture solid, then slipped out into the storm, leaving Jax with the rain's lullaby and a decision etched in wakefulness. Dawn broke grey and sodden, the motel lot steaming as the sun clawed through clouds. Riders fired up engines, the roar scattering birds from the eaves, exhaust mingling with mist in a hazy veil. Jax mounted last, his Indian purring to life, the vibration chasing the night's chill from his bones. Evan led out, the convoy snaking back onto the highway, water sluicing from roads in silver streams. Jax rode closer now, drafting in the truck's wake, the miles to Mercy General shrinking like doubts under scrutiny. Billboards blurred past, faded promises of diners and dreams, but his focus sharpened on the horizon, where answers waited in a little girl's gaze. At the hospital, the lot filled again, bikes lining up like loyal hounds. Lila met them at the entrance, Ruby in a wheelchair, bundled in blankets, her cheeks pink with returning vigor. The girl's eyes lit on Jax, a spark of recognition beyond words. "You came back," she said simply, extending a hand. Jax knelt, taking it gently, the small fingers warm in his calloused grip. "Yeah, kid. Roads lead home sometimes." Lila watched, tears tracing silent paths, the circle closing not with fanfare but the quiet click of a lock, long rusted. Evan stood sentinel, the convoy a backdrop of chrome and honor, their presence weaving the final threads. Blood had saved her body. This ride mended the soul, proving promises outlasted storms, binding the lost into legacy under an unforgiving sky. The hospital corridor stretched like a vein, under the midday sun filtering through high windows, casting elongated shadows that danced across the linoleum. Jax Harlan walked beside Ruby's wheelchair, his boots thudding softly in rhythm with the wheel's faint squeak, the air thick with the mingled scents of fresh linens and blooming flowers from the rider's offerings. Ruby tilted her head up, her small face framed by the blanket's edge, eyes bright with a curiosity that pierced Jax's armor. "You smell like rain and metal," she said, her voice a whisper laced with wonder, fingers still curled around his index finger, as if anchoring a kite string. Lila pushed the chair, her steps measured, the tension in her shoulders easing like a knot slowly untying. Evan trailed a pace behind, his presence a quiet bulwark, the convoy's engines idling outside like a heartbeat waiting to surge. They settled in a sunlit atrium off the main ward, a glass-enclosed haven where potted ferns rustled in the recycled air, and the distant hum of the city filtered through like white noise. Jax lowered himself onto a bench, the wood creaking under his weight, while Lila lifted Ruby onto his lap, a gesture bold yet tender, her eyes meeting his in silent permission. The girl's warmth seeped through his shirt, a foreign comfort against the chill of isolation he'd worn for years. "Tell me about your bike," Ruby prompted. Tracing the serpent tattoo on his forearm with a tentative touch, the ink's faded lines telling stories of oaths and outruns. Jax cleared his throat, the words rusty from disuse, and began. "The winds howl on open stretches, stars mapping routes through black nights, the engine's growl as a companion when silence grew too loud. His voice rumbled low, painting pictures that drew a smile from her lips, the first real one since the crisis. Lila sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap, watching the scene unfold like a long-delayed sunrise. Regret had been her shadow for 6 years, nights wondering if she'd stolen Ruby's chance at roots by keeping silent. But now, in the atrium's gentle light, it softened into something redeemable. "She was born on a stormy July," she said softly, breaking into Jax's tale, her voice steadying as she wove in details. The labor under flickering fluorescence, the first cry echoing like a siren's call. Jax listened, his free arm encircling Ruby protectively, the pieces slotting into place with a click that echoed his prison cell's lock turning free. He'd imagined faceless regrets on lonely rides, but this, her laughter bubbling at his description of a desert mirage, made them flesh and blood. Evan leaned against a pillar nearby, arms crossed, his gaze scanning the space for intrusions, the old soldier's instinct never fully dormant. Outside, the convoy stirred subtly, riders milling in the lot with thermoses and maps, their leathers drying under the sun's climb. Word rippled through the network like exhaust on the breeze. The match was more than vains. It was a homecoming, the Iron Oath's code proving unbreakable. But harmony fractured when a suited figure approached from the hospital's side entrance, an administrator flanked by 2 security guards, clipboards clutched like badges of order. "Mr. Brooks," the man called, voice clipped over the atrium's threshold, his polished shoes squeaking to a halt. "We need to discuss the gathering. Permits for such a group aren't on file, and with the child's recovery—" Evan straightened, stepping forward with the calm of a man who'd faced worse tribunals. "They're not visitors, they're kin. Kept her alive when the system couldn't." The exchange drew eyes, nurses pausing mid-stride, patients peering from doorways. But Jax felt the shift, Ruby tensing in his arms, her small body picking up the undercurrent like a tuning fork. He rose slowly, handing her back to Lila, the transfer smooth as passing a torch. "Let me handle this," he murmured to Evan, his stride carrying him to the confrontation. Boots echoing authority earned on backroads. The administrator faltered under Jax's gaze, the biker's frame filling the doorway, serpent ink, a subtle warning. "Kid's my blood," Jax said, words measured, the truth landing like gravel settling. "Rode through hell to get here. You want permits? We'll get 'em. But you don't block family from mending." The guards shifted, hands hovering near radios, but the man's bluster deflated, sensing the steel beneath the civility. "We'll review the situation," he muttered, retreating with a nod, the corridor swallowing him whole. Back in the atrium, Ruby clapped softly, oblivious to the undercurrents, her energy returning like dawn chasing shadows. "Did you make the bad man go away?" she asked Jax, reaching for him again. He knelt, the tile cool against his knee, and nodded, ruffling her hair gently. "Roads have their ways, kid. Clears the path." Lila's eyes met his over the girl's head, a bridge forming in the silence. Forgiveness not demanded, but offered freely, the year's distance shrinking to the span of a shared glance. Evan clapped Jax on the back as they rejoined the group, the gesture sealing the moment, his voice low. "Oaths tested in the tight spots. You held." The atrium filled with tentative warmth, stories flowing freer now, the ferns rustle underscoring laughter that chased away the sterile chill. As afternoon waned, the sun dipping toward the lot, where bikes gleamed like polished promises, Jax felt the pull of the road lessen, replaced by roots taking hold. Ruby dozed against his shoulder, her breaths even, the crisis a fading echo. Lila touched his arm, her fingers lingering. "Stay for dinner? Hospital cafeteria, or we could ride out, find a real meal." The invitation hung, simple yet profound, the first step on a path rewritten. Jax nodded, the weight lifting like fog burned off by light. Evan watched from the pillar, a faint smile cracking his weathered face, the network's web tightening, turning solitary riders into a circle unbreakable. Outside, engines revved softly in anticipation, not of departure, but arrival. the convoy ready to escort them into whatever horizon awaited. Promises once whispers in the wind, now roared solid, binding scars into strength under the sky's vast witness. The sun hung low over the hospital parking lot, painting the rows of Harleys in hues of amber and rust, their chrome edges catching the light like embers in a dying fire. Jax Harlan stood at the edge of the asphalt, Ruby's small hand still warm in his, the girl's wheelchair parked beside him, as Lila adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. The air carried the faint bite of exhaust, mingled with the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil from an earlier shower, a reminder that storms passed, leaving ground fertile for new growth. Riders milled nearby, their leathers creaking softly as they packed saddlebags with care, flowers wilting slightly in the heat, toys wrapped for the road ahead. Evan Brooks leaned against his Ford, arms folded, his gaze sweeping the group like a captain surveying his crew after a long haul. The confrontation with the administrator had faded into the day's rhythm, a minor squall in the larger voyage, but it had solidified something unbreakable. The oath's reach extended beyond blood draws and urgent rides into the quiet battles of belonging. Ruby tugged at Jax's sleeve, her eyes sparkling with the unfiltered joy of recovery, the pallor of her ordeal giving way to a natural glow. "Can we ride on your bike now? Just a little?" Her voice was light, threaded with the innocence that had drawn him back from the brink of flight. Jax knelt to her level, the gravel biting into his knee through his jeans, and ruffled her hair with a gentleness he'd forgotten he possessed. "Not today, kid, but soon when you're strong enough we'll take the curves slow, feel the wind tell stories." Lila watched from the wheelchair's side, her expression a mosaic of relief and tentative hope, the lines of exhaustion softening around her eyes. Years of single-handed vigilance had forged her steel. But this moment, Jax's promise hanging in the air like exhaust trails, eased the load she'd carried alone. No grand declarations, just the subtle shift of shoulders relaxing, a family piecing itself together in fragments. Evan pushed off the truck, his boots crunching over scattered pebbles as he approached, the sun casting his shadow long across the lot. "Convoy's ready to roll out. We'll escort you home. Lila's place on Elm Street, right? Make sure the path stays clear." His tone was matter-of-fact, the logistics of loyalty woven into every word, but beneath it pulsed the deeper current. This wasn't an end, but a continuation, the network's threads extending to guard what they'd reclaimed. Jax straightened, nodding as he met Evan's eyes, the unspoken gratitude passing between them like a shared glance over handlebars. The war had taught Evan the fragility of bonds, his brother's absence a scar that ached in quiet moments, but rides like this mended it, turning ghosts into guides. "Appreciate it," Jax said, his voice gravel rough but steady. "Owe you more than miles." The group mobilized with practiced ease, engines coughing to life in a cascading roar that vibrated through the ground, scattering pigeons from the hospital eaves. Jax helped Lila lift Ruby into the passenger seat of her modest sedan, the girl's stuffed bear tucked beside her like a co-pilot. He lingered at the door, his hand brushing Lila's as she settled behind the wheel, a touch electric with history, sparking memories of that long-ago night when promises were whispered in the dark. "We'll talk more," she said softly, her fingers squeezing his briefly, the contact bridging the chasm of years without a word. Jax stepped back, the sedan pulling into the convoy's fold, sandwiched between Evan's truck and a line of bikes fanned protectively. He mounted his Indian, the familiar leather seat molding to him like an old friend, the throttle twisting under his grip to join the formation. As they merged onto the highway, the world blurred into streaks of green and grey, the sun dipping toward the horizon in a blaze that mirrored the fire in Jax's chest. Wind rushed past, cool and cleansing, carrying away the hospital's antiseptic tang and replacing it with the open road's freedom. Pine-scented gusts from bordering woods, the distant hum of traffic fading under the convoy's symphony. Ruby waved from the car window, her small hand a beacon, and Jax felt the pull solidify, no longer a tether to flee but one to follow. Ahead, Evan led with unerring precision, navigating turns that wound through suburbs giving way to quieter streets, the riders' engines a low thunder announcing their passage. Locals paused on porches, curiosity etching their faces, but the convoy rolled on, a testament to honor in motion, unapologetic and whole. Lila's home emerged at dusk, a modest bungalow on Elm, its porch light flickering on like a welcoming signal, flower boxes blooming defiantly against the fading day. The convoy pulled into the drive and overflowed onto the street, engines idling down to murmurs as riders dismounted, forming a loose circle under the street lamp's glow. Jax killed his bike last, the silence settling heavy with finality, the air now laced with the neighborhood scents of grilled dinners and cut grass. Ruby bounded from the car with Lila's help, her steps tentative but eager, straight into Jax's arms for a hug that squeezed the breath from him. "This is home," she declared, pointing at the house, her certainty a balm to his wandering soul. Evan hung back, coordinating quiet farewells, riders slipping cards with numbers into Lila's hand, promises of check-ins and support etched in ink and intent. Dinner unfolded on the porch as twilight deepened, folding chairs dragged out, and plates passed from a cooler stocked by the group, sandwiches thick with roast beef, apples crisp from a roadside stand, coffee steaming in thermoses. Stories flowed like the road itself, Evan recounting a desert patrol that mirrored this ride's urgency, Jax sharing fragments of his journeys without the barbs of regret, Lila weaving in Ruby's milestones with a laugh that rang true. The girl perched on Jax's knee, dozing as stars pricked the sky, her head heavy against his chest. No authorities loomed here, just the quiet victory of presence. The Iron Oath's code proving that justice wasn't in courts or charters, but in the choices that healed unseen wounds. As the convoy prepared to depart, engines stirring once more under the moon's silver watch, Jax lingered on the steps, Lila beside him. "Don't vanish again," she said. Not a plea, but a statement, her hand finding his in the dim light. He squeezed it, the gesture sealing vows unspoken. Road's got room for 3 now. Evan revved his truck, the riders falling in behind, tail lights winking like goodbyes as they rolled into the night. Jax watched until the red glow faded, the bungalow's warmth pulling him inside, where Ruby's soft snores echoed from her room. One call had ignited the spark. This homecoming fanned it into a steady flame, proving family was forged not in blood alone, but in the honor of returning. The loyalty that outran any shadow. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If these tales of quiet courage touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and join the pack. We've got more stories revving up on the horizon.